got late. Continuing on. The following day, April 18th, Sergeant Carter and Detective Bueller, Grogan, and Brocchini drove to San Diego in an unmarked vehicles to assist with Scott's arrest. Arriving at 4 a.m., they checked into the Best Western Escondido Motel. Even though they had a signed warrant, they wanted to wait until the DNA results before attempting an arrest. Once Scott was located, he would simply be watching pending those results unless he headed for the Mexican border. Brocchini remained in contact with surveillance agents as well as the wire room where calls were tracked. Ernie Lyman of the Department of Justice had picked up their suspect early that morning, leaving a 377 Lytham Glen in Escondido in a dark red 1984 Mercedes-Benz. He lost him briefly, but with air support had him back in sight. Scott seemed to know that he was being trailed and was driving in a manner commonly referred to as counter-surveillance. He got onto the freeway, immediately got off, and then abruptly re-entered once again. Agents noted that he was talking on his cell phone at the time. While driving in the high-speed lane of the freeway, Scott suddenly pulled over to the shoulder lane and stopped momentarily, almost causing a collision with the members of the DOJ team. Scott then continued northbound into the city of Solano Beach, where his parents lived. He continued driving erratically through the residential area of Rancho Santa Fe, traveling on roads that were lined with leafy trees and created a canopy and shielded the Mercedes-Benz from the air. He drove near his parents' residence but never turned on their street. He made sudden stops and U-turns and drove at a high rate of speeds through the hills. At one point, agents saw him display his middle finger as he drove. As he was racing along, Scott Peterson called his brother Joe. He said he couldn't join Joe at the golf course that morning because he was followed by private investigators. He explained that he had lost them and then another set got him. "Where are you at? Are you, well, I don't want to talk about that, I guess," Joe said. "I'm in Genesee. These guys, they don't know I'm on to them," Scott said. He told Joe he'd stopped on the highway and that they'd stopped behind him. "I think I'd better skip it because I don't think I want pictures of me in the press playing golf." "I saw the picture where everybody is leaving flowers and stuffed animals and everything in front of your house," Joe said. "Oh, yeah?" "Yeah," Joe confirmed. "Any indication when they may find these bodies?" "No. There is so much hype there, it's insane." "Yeah, it's bad. I have also heard that they can identify them pretty darn quick. 2 to 3 days, you know," Joe said. "Yeah, they know it's not her," Scott replied. "Yeah, that's what I think. I think they already know, or they're telling them to retest them. I don't know." "Oh, I think they're holding off because they don't know anymore," Scott replied. "Who it is? Yeah, that could be. That could be." "Have fun, guys," Scott said. "Sorry, bro." "It's not your fault. Thanks for the thought, though." Just before 8 a.m., agents chased Scott back onto the I-5 freeway northbound. Suddenly, he cut across 4 lanes of traffic and abruptly left the highway. The agents followed him off and then kept up with him when he re-entered unexpectedly. They saw him clap his hands, apparently applauding them for their efforts. Scott's game continued. Just after 11 o'clock, the media was reporting DNA test results would soon confirm that the bodies of Lacey and Connor Peterson and Scott Peterson's arrest was imminent. Detectives now feared that these reports might have caused Scott to attempt an escape. Furthermore, his continued erratic driving could endanger members of the DOJ team or the public. "Stop and arrest him," Grogan instructed Lyman. Lyman and his team followed Scott on the Carmel Mountain Road and then south on South Camino del Mar, which becomes Torrey Pine Roads. As they approached the Torrey Pine Golf Club, Lyman switched to his flaming blue and red police lights. Scott immediately pulled over to the right. Officers were wearing dark jackets and yellow letters identifying them as the police and jumped out of their vehicles and ordered Scott to turn off the ignition and to get out of the car. Scott was dressed in a blue sweater worn over a white polo shirt, white shorts, ankle-high socks, and Nike tennis shoes. Dark sunglasses shaded his eyes. He wore no jewelry, not even a wedding ring. His eyes, eyebrows, and beard were all dyed an orangey blonde color. Scott offered no resistance as the police handcuffed him. After asking what agency they were with, he followed with a second question. "Have they found my wife and son?" One officer said that they would talk to him about that shortly and directed him to sit on the curb, away from public view. "Do you know why you're being detained and arrested?" Agent Lyman said. Peterson said, "Because of my erratic driving." That wasn't the reason, he was told. "Do you know of any other?" "Well, Modesto wants me about a murder." It was 2 murders, Scott. At 11:15, the Modesto investigators arrived at the scene. Scott Peterson was placed in the rear of a Ford Taurus station wagon that police had parked a short distance away. Detective Grogan placed a tape recorder on the seat and stated the date and time. April 18, 2003, 11:35/11:36 hours. He formally notified Scott that, pursuant to a warrant, he was under the arrest for the crime of murder. He asked Scott if he had any questions, and Scott said no. As Scott and Grogan were transported to the DOJ office, a tape recorder captured their conversation. Grogan asked who should be notified about picking up the Mercedes-Benz after it was searched. While there was a certificate of title and other documentation in the car, it had not been registered in anyone's name. This prevented police from simply checking the license plate to locate the owner. A double-edged knife in a case was found along the left side of the driver's seat, along with the driver's license issued to Scott's brother, John. Scott's newly lightened hair was a close match to John's photo on his license. During a more thorough search of the Mercedes-Benz over a 3-day period, police found the following: U.S. currency totaling to $14,932, with $14,000 in $100 bills, still wrapped in the paper bands from the bank. 3 credit cards, 2 in Scott's name, 1 in the name of his half-sister, Ann Bird. A Columbia foul weather jacket, a hand shovel, a backpack containing a water purifier, water bottle, climbing rope, fillet knife, a roll of duct tape, cooking grill, rain pants, Ziploc bags, extra socks, fire starters, a camp kit with cooking utensils, leather gloves, 2 folding knives, a folding saw, 1 pair of scissors, 2 packs of razor blades, and a waterproofing spray, a camp axe, a hammock, binoculars, a mask, a snorkel, a fishing rod and reel, and a leatherman's tool. 12 pairs of shoes, ranging from flip-flops to waterproof boots to dress boots, and an entire wardrobe including numerous pants, shirts, jackets, underwear, socks, neckties, and sweaters, and a cowboy hat were all packed into a bag. 16 CDs and 2 California guidebooks, 24 blister packs and sleeping pills, 12 tablets of Viagra, 4 cell phones, a gas credit card in his mother's name, and a quantity of Mexican currency were also found. As many observed after the arrest, it was evident that Scott was going somewhere for quite a while. One destination might have been the nearby Mexican border, and he was familiar with that country. His supporters would argue that he was simply trying to hide out from the press for a while, as I pointed out at this time, Scott's friends and relatives had kept him concealed from the cameras in their homes for some time. The items in his car indicated to me that Scott Peterson had packed for more than a camping trip. It is 12:05 and Scott was brought into a large training room in the DOJ office. He complained that his shoulders ached from having his hands cuffed behind him and asked if they could be loosened. Scott Peterson's a little bitch. Grogan left the room and returned with the waist chain and the cuffs. He read Scott Peterson his constitutional rights. Scott nodded his head, affirming that he understood but said nothing. Grogan then told Scott that he could be booked into the San Diego County, or if he waived his rights, to the Stanislaus County. Scott said he wanted to speak with his attorney before answering. He also wanted to use the telephone. Grogan informed him that he could make 3 calls, but the first had to be photographed. When Scott was given a phone, he immediately dialed his attorney, but was only able to leave a voice message. Next, he called his mother and told her that he had been arrested. His third call, bizarrely, was to Heather and Mike Richardson. "Hey, this is Scott. I just wanted to make sure that I returned your call," Scott reportedly said. "I made you some lavender cookies. That is what I was gonna send, but I got arrested a couple of hours ago, so I have to go." Heather later reported that Scott had called the day before to get her mailing address so that he could send her cookies. Lacey used to bake them regularly using dried lavender petals. She also recounted her call to Scott on April 26 to see how he was doing. The bodies had been recovered at that time, and she wanted to hear what Scott might have to say about the discovery. But she didn't ask about the bodies, and amazingly, Scott Peterson didn't mention them either. Instead, he talked about traveling to Arizona and New Mexico to post flyers about Lacey's disappearance. By this time, there were more signs that Scott Peterson was experiencing serious psychological dysfunction. Scott would not be examined, and the psychiatric testimony would not be permitted during the trial, but there were increasing public conversation about Scott's flat affect and arguably inappropriate responses to unfolding events. Months after Lacey's brother had actually confronted Scott about his behavior, calling him a sociopath, that description would resonate publicly as people learned more about the seemingly charming young man's psyche. Scott asked the police if he could make one more call. When Grogan asked who he was going to contact, he said his work, to tell them that he wouldn't be coming in. Grogan told him he would have the opportunity to make that call later. Detective Grogan left the room for a few moments. DOJ agent Charles Wilcom remained with their charge. Suddenly, Scott, who was still wearing sunglasses, turned to him and said, "I want to apologize for the way I was driving this morning. I didn't know who you guys were." "Thank you? But I wasn't on the team that followed you," Wilcom replied. "Oh," Scott said. "Okay, I just wanted to apologize." The conversation rambled on for a while, and then looking at his watch, Scott noted, "I was supposed to take my niece to the movies in a couple of hours today." He paused and then added, "Well, maybe in a couple of weeks I'll be able to do that." Wilcom would record that Scott did not seem worried or overly concerned that he was being arrested. Peterson's demeanor was calm, devoid of grief, concern, or anger. Most of the time, Peterson displayed a distant stare toward the wall across from where he sat and occasionally smiled while talking to me. Late that afternoon, Scott Peterson was placed in leg irons and waist chains in addition to the handcuffs. Detective Grogan and Bueller then put him in a car for the ride to the Stanislaus County Jail. The vehicle was wired with transmitters in the trunk to record any conversations. Brokini and Carter followed in a separate car, monitoring those transmissions. At 5:20, as they were driving back to Modesto, Grogan received a call informing him that the DNA results were complete. Jane Doe had been identified as Lacey Peterson, and baby Doe was identified as Scott's biological child, Connor Peterson. Investigators had compared DNA from the muscle and the bone samples from the autopsy to DNA from Lacey's mother and father, Sharon and Dennis Rocha. They had also taken 8 hairs from a brush that had belonged to Lacey Rocha, as well as a pap smear they obtained from her gynecologist. They also had a blood sample from Scott Peterson, which they used to identify the fetus. The law required that the next of kin be notified. Scott Peterson was that person. Because of the highway noise and the concern that it would mask any response Scott made on hearing the news, Grogan opted to postpone the notification. At 6:50 p.m., detective told Scott that the bodies had been found in the San Francisco Bay and had been identified as Lacey and Connor Rocha through a DNA match. Pulling the sunglasses aside from his eyes, he bowed his head. Grogan saw a tear run down the side of his face. Scott Peterson wiped it away and closed his eyes. He put on his sunglasses and his eyes still remained shut. He did not utter a sound, but Grogan saw no more tears. 15 minutes later, Bueller asked Scott if he wanted any water or food. He declined. At 8 o'clock, the officer stopped at an In-N-Out Burger in Bakersfield. By then, Scott was ready for a double cheeseburger and fries and a vanilla milkshake. While seated in the car with Grogan, waiting for Brocchini and Carter to return with food, Scott commented on a woman carrying a small child wrapped in a blanket to a car parked in front of them. Scott remarked that the baby appeared to be only about a month old. After making the observation, he fell silent again. Grogan had requested that Scott be booked in an undisclosed location to thwart media coverage. But en route to Modesto, he learned that arrangements had been made for a single pool car to be set inside the gate at the jail. Scott would be booked there. Just before midnight, the group pulled into the facility. Scott was escorted into the jail in full view of the camera. On the second floor, he was booked according to standard procedure and charged with 2 counts of 187 PC, murder in the first degree. With the incredible publicity surrounding Scott Peterson's arrest, new tips began coming into the police headquarters. One such call came from Miguel Espidia E-S-P-I-D-I-A, Espidia, of Redwood City, who said that he had been a classmate of Scott's and Lacey's at Cal Poly. Upon reading a newspaper article that mentioned Lacey's headless body, he recalled a conversation he had with Scott Peterson back in 1995. Miguel couldn't remember how the conversation started, but he and Scott had been driving in a car when Scott began describing how he might kill someone. He said he would wrap the head in a plastic bag and then weigh it down. He would throw the body into salt water so that the salt and the fish would eat away at the fingers, destroying all the fingerprints. If you weighed the head, he said, the body would float upwards. The fish and salt would eat away at the neck, eventually separating the head from the body. If a body was found without fingers or a head, Scott thought that it couldn't be identified. Scott Peterson assured him that he would never do such a thing, Miguel said. These were just Scott Peterson's thoughts. Detective Brocchini will later testify about the call at trial. As he described the tip, he mentioned wrapping the head with duct tape as one of the things Scott described to Miguel. Since the report had actually said nothing about the duct tape, Mark Garagos climbed all over the detective, accusing him of embellishing the story to make it an exact fit with the Petersons' facts. Brocchini would later say that he hadn't refreshed his memory about the tip before testifying and was simply confused, but Garagos scored points with the trial watchers. Although it was a minor infraction, this was one of the several embarrassing mistakes that would damage Brocchini's credibility during the trial. While going through property seized after Scott's arrest, Detective Bueller came across a tiny scrap of paper with the woman's name and phone number. Natalie Mangura matched that of a woman who had phoned the tip line the previous night. The 28-year-old Mangira told Bueller that she had been house sitting at the home of Ann Burt's parents in San Diego and that she knew Scott was there on April 18th, just hours before his arrest. She first encountered Peterson on Monday evening, April 14th, at about 11 p.m. when she arrived to find the two-door reddish Mercedes-Benz parked outside of the front of the house. As she entered the house, she yelled, "Is anybody home?" And Scott Peterson answered. Natalie had been advised that Scott might be staying at the residence temporarily, but she hadn't expected him until the following week. He quickly told her that he could sleep downstairs and she could stay upstairs. Uncomfortable when he insisted, Natalie told Scott that she didn't need to stay overnight since the family cat had died. "Did you kill the cat?" Scott smiled. "No," she explained. "The cat had died of natural causes." Before leaving, she gave Scott her cell phone number and asked that he contact her when he was leaving so that she could resume her duties. Natalie reported that Scott had been preparing his taxes when she arrived that night. She later learned from Ann that he had used one of the homeowner's cars, a Lexus, to mail his taxes so that he wouldn't be recognized by the media or investigators. Several days later, police received additional information about the Mercedes-Benz that he was driving when he was arrested. Michael Griffin, a substitute teacher, had advertised a 1984 Mercedes-Benz in the Auto Trader magazine, asking for about $5,000 for the car. On April 12th, Scott Peterson responded to the ad and showed up to drive the automobile. He then offered $3,600 cash, and Griffin agreed. Scott Peterson's a piece of shit, and he also just happens to be frugal. Scott left, returning just 10 minutes later with 36 $100 bills. Scott produced the necessary DMV forms downloaded from the internet. When Griffin examined them, he noticed that they had been filled out in the name of Jacqueline Peterson. The Peterson family is very scary to me. This is what happens when a clan of narcissists choose a golden child, and yeah. He noticed that they had been filled out in the name of Jacqueline Peterson. He questioned this, yet Scott insisted it was correct. It was kind of a boy named Sue type name, Scott claimed. "That's what my parents stuck me with," he added, and that he went by the name Jack. So he's making up names. Kept the last name Peterson like a moron. Griffin told the police that Scott appeared to be in a fucking hurry. Sorry. At trial, Griffin told the police that Scott appeared to be in a hurry. He couldn't produce any ID, but he did recite what he claimed was a Florida driver's license number. At trial, Griffin told the court that the double-edged dagger found in the car when Scott arrested actually had belonged to him. He had forgotten to remove it when Scott took the car, but the balance of the very long list of recovered items belonged to Scott didn't help. Police interviewed a second man named Mechanic Mario Ravalcaba, who said that the man named Scott Peterson had called him from a cell phone with an 858 area code about a car ad in Auto Trader. The two arranged a meeting at Ravalcaba's place of business. Scott was a tall white guy, about 30 years old, with blonde hair and a goatee, he recalled. After the test drive, Scott said, "Fine, I'll take it right now." He seemed anxious to get the car and said he would pay cash. "We filled out all the paperwork," he continued. "I noticed that he put Jacqueline Peterson on everything. I didn't see the name Scott anywhere. I thought maybe he was gay. I thought maybe he was gay or transsexual. It's very kind of him to assume that. And that Jacqueline was his female name. It's a valid assumption in California. There was one problem. Ruval Kaba needed to get Scott a copy of the smog certificate for the vehicle and postponed the deal until 8 o'clock the following morning. In the meantime, Ruvalcaba called another prospective buyer to let her know that the car might be sold. The woman cried and carried on so much that Ruvalcaba agreed to sell it to her instead. I phoned Scott to tell him that the deal was off, and it made him really angry. He accused me of wasting his time. Later that day, Scott returned to the Ruvalcaba's shop. He told him no, but Scott continued to push. After leaving, he phoned the shop again and said, "Are we dealing or not?" Very firmly. Again, he was told no. On April 21st, District Attorney Jim Brazelton, members of his staff, and investigators from the Modesto Police Department met with the Rocha family prior to Scott's arraignment. The district attorney informed them what was to be expected going forward. He could never have imagined the media firestorm that would range throughout the proceedings. At 1:30 that afternoon, Scott stood impassively before the Honorable Judge Nancy Ashley in the Stanislaus County Superior Court. He was clean-shaven, yet his thick hair was still strawberry blonde. His face revealed nothing as the charges were read on or about between December 23rd and December 24th of 2002. Defendant did commit a felony murder violation of Section 187 of the California Penal Code, in that the defendant did willfully, unlawfully, and feloniously, and with malice aforethought, murdered Lacey Denise Rocha, a human being. It is further alleged as the count 1 murder that the defendant acted intentionally, deliberately, and with premeditation. He was also charged with a second count of murder for the death of his unborn son, Connor Rocha. Scott Peterson responded with the 4 words, "I am not guilty." The charge carried a special enhancement under California law, alleging that he deliberately killed Lacey and her unborn child with premeditation. The combination of charges meant that Scott Peterson was not eligible for bail, and if found guilty, he would face the death penalty. During the proceedings, Scott Peterson was assigned a public defender, even though McAllister had accompanied him to court. It would be another month before Mark Garagos took the case. Outside the courtroom, McAllister would not discuss why he was no longer representing Scott. Some pundits speculated that the reason was financial. Following the arraignment, the Rocha family held an emotional press conference. With tears streaming down her face, Sharon Rocha praised the Modesto police. She recalled that from the moment she received Scott's Christmas phone call, "I knew in my heart something terrible had happened to Lacey and her son. My world collapsed around me." She said that Lacey's killer should be held accountable and punished for the tragedy and the devastation forced upon so many of us. I can only hope that the sound of Lacey's voice begging for her life, begging for the life of her unborn child, is heard over and over and over again in the mind of that person every day for the rest of his life. Ron Gratzky added, "I feel sorry for Jackie and Lee. They don't deserve this, but our family didn't either." Ugh. As Scott was led back to the jail, police continued their interviews. Mike Richardson had been seen on television discussing Scott's new hair color, so he got another call. Mike explained that he did He had invited Scott Peterson to his ranch in Fillmore about 3 weeks earlier. When Scott arrived, Mike immediately noticed the color change. Scott said that he had been swimming in his friend Aaron's pool in Mountain View and that the chlorine had bleached his hair. Mike didn't ask any more questions but was skeptical. This information prompted police to obtain a search warrant for hair samples and full body photographs to test whether the hair dye or pool chemicals lightened Scott Peterson's hair. Additionally, Heather Richardson told detectives that during her conversation with Scott, he admitted to an affair with a woman in San Luis Obispo, where Lacey was living in Prudendale. Although he did not name her, it was probably Janet Eyes, the woman who had walked in on Scott and Lacey in bed those many years ago. However, it might have been Katie Hansen, who was sitting next to Scott at graduation when the pretty brunette walked over and presented him with a flower lei and a big kiss. Whatever girl it was, Scott seemed surprised that Lacey hadn't told her. Heather also recalled an argument between Scott and Lacey after Scott's graduation from Cal Poly. She and Mike had attended a celebratory dinner with the couple afterwards. Heather could tell that Lacey was upset. When they left the restaurant, everyone drove to the house and Scott was sharing with his 3 roommates. Lacey and Scott went into the bedroom. Heather overheard her yelling at him and Scott did not respond. It sounded like he was just taking it, Heather said. Yeah, Scott Peterson was taking it because he doesn't understand personal accountability and he's a little bitch. Lacey never explained why the two had been arguing, but at the graduation ceremony, she commented that Scott had been living with the guys and acting single. Still, even if Lacey knew about the affair, Heather did not believe that she was told about Amber Fry. Police also interviewed Jim Allen, the manager of the Torrey Pines Golf Club, where Scott had told the police he was heading when he was arrested. Although Scott did not have a tee time reserved, said Allen, Lee Peterson was in the book for April 18th for a foursome at 8 o'clock that morning. Only 3 golfers showed up that day, and Allen added another lone golfer to round out the group. Detective Grogan also spoke to a technician, Denise Duckett, who said that she had worked with Kim McGregor at Valley Oaks Pediatric Center. According to Duckett, another coworker told her that McGregor was claiming a sexual interlude with Scott Peterson after Lacey disappeared. The police found no further evidence of such a liaison. In a similar vein, police also learned of a stripper at a club in San Diego who claimed to have a short affair with Scott Peterson. The day before his arrest, she said he asked her to run to Mexico with him. Police thought the information was credible, but the woman was fearful of recrimination at work if she came forward. Such leads appeared to corroborate the detective's suspicions that Scott was planning to leave the country. Scott simply may have waited too long to get away because he did not expect the DNA identifications of the bodies to occur so quickly. On Friday, April 25th, Deputy District Attorney Davis Harris and Detective Grogan met with the members of Lacey's family at Sharon Rocha's home to discuss the death penalty. Dennis, Sharon, Brent, and Amy Rocha, Ron Gratzky, and a family representative, Kim Peterson, all supported the death penalty as punishment if Scott Peterson was found guilty. During the meeting, Sharon mentioned Heather Richardson's recollection that Scott had once expressed he didn't want to have children. Days later, she heard Heather tell a TV reporter that Scott was looking forward to being a father, and then read the same comment in the Modesto Bee. Sharon told Grogan that the family was planning to hold a memorial service for Lacey and Connor on Lacey's birthday, May 4th, at 3 p.m. at the First Baptist Church in Modesto. Ron Gratzky later contracted the detective, saying that the family had learned about Amber's sister Ava and her brother Brenda, and her mother Brenda McGee intended to show up. The family didn't want them there, and Ron asked Grogan to relay the information. While the family was appreciative in any way that Amber had handled her involvement, they feared that her presence would sensationalize the solemn occasion. He also asked that Amber not attend. After the family meeting, District Attorney James Brazelton called the press conference to announce that a decision had been made to seek the death penalty in the case of the people of California versus Scott Peterson. Publicly, Laci's family had no comment. On April 29th, Grogan received a call from Rick Distaso. The public defender's office had just informed Distaso that defense attorney Mark Geragos had agreed to take Scott Peterson's case pro bono. Geragos would arrive on May 2nd with all the legal issues, upcoming motions, and the sealing of search warrants were to be held until then. While there was no question that Geragos was taking on the case, it was unclear whether he had agreed to represent Scott Peterson free of charge. It was never entirely clear what the financial arrangements were. Geragos repeatedly declined to disclose how much he was charging the family, but later told colleagues that he took the police for a flat fee. The figure that circulated was $1 million, but that amount was never to be confirmed. On Larry King Live the following evening, the flashy defense counselor was a call-in guest. Although he declined to reveal whether he was agreeing to take on the case, he indicated that he'd met the players and was seriously considering it. I can tell you that Scott's mother, especially, is a very compelling advocate for her son, Geragos told King. And I've met up with Scott and I've talked with the public defenders. I was up in Modesto yesterday, and I'm going to sleep on it and make a decision. Mark, you can give us a balancing point, what's for and what's for against, King asked. For one thing, Geragos conceded, I think he's already universally convicted in the court of public opinion. I don't think there's anybody that you can talk to that doesn't assume that he's just guilty. But the attorney noted that the part of why people go into criminal defense is to defend the underdog and to try to make it a truly adversarial system. And that is definitely intriguing in this case. I am pretty sure Detective Geragos wrote a book and has been openly doing any and all podcasts on the issue. So when it comes to his pro bono bullshit, he's a salesman. That's all he is. That's all he will ever be to the justice system. Okay. So what's the downside, King asked. Well, the downside is that it's a monumental undertaking, and in terms of time, number one, and effort, and I suppose as well, the other clients and the impact of the other lawyers in my practice, and there's a whole lot of other factors, others that I won't even get into on air. When pressed, Geragos did claim that he was tremendously impressed by Scott Peterson, and obviously that's something that leans towards me in the case as well. At one point in the program, the show was opening up to callers. To the surprise of many, Lee Peterson phoned in to confirm legal analysis Nancy Grace, a passionate believer in Scott's guilt. The exchange was heated and had a lot of crosstalk. Nancy Grace, he said, I've watched many of your programs. I don't like to watch them, but it kind of keeps me informed and I can feel the public sentiment. I just have to say, for some reason, you seem to have a personal take in this, a personal vendetta against my son, and I don't understand it. It's so obvious that you are just caught up in this thing, and there's no room for it, you know? Innocence until proven guilty. And I'm just appalled by that. I don't think that it's your place to be the spokesperson for the district attorney. I know he may not believe it, Nancy Grace responded, but my heart goes out to Lee and the family and the pain his family's having. But I am speaking on behalf of what I believe to be true, on behalf of Lacey Rocha, neither against Scott or for the state, against the state, but what I believe to be a true guard of her murder. You are speculating on these facts as much as I am, Lee Peterson argued. And you are believing what your son is telling you. As Peterson began to respond, Grace interjected. Please don't interrupt me, Peterson asked. You've had your safe here for months and you've crucified my son on national media. He's a wonderful man. You have no idea his background and what a wonderful son and what a wonderful man he is. You have no knowledge of that, and you sit here and as judge and jury and you guess you're convincing him on national media, and you should be absolutely ashamed of yourself. Sir, I think you should be ashamed of himself as whoever is responsible for the death of Lacey Rocha. Grace responded. I'm responsible. I am simply stating what has been leaked or what has been on formal documents, and if you find them disturbing, I suggest you ask your son some of them, sir. There you go, Nancy. Look at this. Look at Nancy's face. You absolutely hate my son. I don't know what it is. No, I don't hate your son. I don't know your son. The argument went on like that for a while, and Lee continued to defend his son. You don't have any of the facts, he told Grace at one point. All you have is your anger and your speculation, and I think you hate men. On May 2nd, Deputy District Attorney Rick Distasio, yeah, asked investigator Kevin Bertolato and Kirk McAllister and asked if he had any information that might clear Scott Peterson of the murder charges. 3 days later, Bertolato encountered McAllister in the hallway of Stanislaus County Court building. He knew McAllister from past cases and approached him with an extended hand. Good morning, Bertolato said, shaking the lawyer's hand. And then he asked McAllister if he wanted to share any information that could clear Scott Peterson to the district attorney's office. Go fuck yourself, McAllister responded. Don't shoot the messenger, Bertolito responded. We've always got along good. Yeah, I know, McAllister shot back, patting the investigator on the arm. We'll take this message to whoever. Go fuck yourselves. The battle was on. Okay, have a good day. I have a surprise for you guys the next video.